Reflecting on their recent discussion with the Paladin commander, which occurred just prior to this leg of the journey, the main protagonist suddenly grasped the potential reason behind his unusual behavior. It dawned on her that perhaps, since that moment, the sacred energy had not reverted to its normal state. While she hoped for a swift return to normalcy, she speculated that Elvinores might be monitoring her until she fully recovered. While this notion brought her comfort, she hadn't been aware earlier that emotions could significantly impact divine energy. Lately, Renee had been neglecting her own well-being, feeling subdued. However, she realized the importance of being more vigilant, as disregarding this aspect could lead to depression. The group received information that they were nearing the camp, indicating the imminent conclusion of the transition. This news brought relief, and with no sign of rain in the near future, there would be no need to assist the heir to the duchy. Through sleep, the priestess could rejuvenate herself for better overall well-being. Lily, observing her friend lost in thought, grew concerned as Renee seemed to forget to be cautious while navigating the damp ground. Despite having stumbled before, the young woman was reluctant to rescue the main protagonist from danger again. However, her warnings went unheeded, and Renee stumbled once more, requiring assistance to regain her balance. This time, she found herself in the arms of the splendid Elvinores, who expressed concern about any potential injuries the healer might have sustained. Though embarrassed, Renee quickly distanced herself from her savior, pledging to avoid such situations in the future. Elvinores then proposed walking together to the camp, even though it was still an hour away. The main protagonist was hesitant, promptly joining her friend. However, the Paladin commander insisted they walk behind them, sounding more like an order than a suggestion. The man's connection to the imperial family became evident, and even Lily decided to leave them alone, proceeding ahead while their commander directed the other paladins, sending them on their way. In the end, they found themselves at the very back. This irritated Renesha. She could not understand how this could happen when the whole group had slowed down this time, and she should at least be keeping pace with them. Elvinores extended his hand to the obedient one. Initially, she was reluctant to touch it, but then she realized she had no choice and finally responded to the gesture. Walking became much more comfortable, although there were allegations that the man could easily ascend due to his physique, while the main protagonist could not. During one of these situations, the Paladin commander helped Renee to rise and expressed deep concern for her. The young woman once again thought it was about her divine power and assured him that everything was fine. She would soon fully restore her energy by simply getting a good night's sleep. Now the man openly declared that the real issue was not that, seriously looking her in the eyes. He stated that, difficult as it might be to believe, the motives behind his actions were not a common goal, but something else. They were approaching the camp very soon, yet the healer appeared weary, as she had hoped for their arrival much earlier. Elvinores and the young lady continued to move hand in hand. She still contemplated his words regarding the true purpose behind the man's assistance to the main protagonist. Some claim that habits form within a month, while others argue that it takes much longer. Renee aligns herself with the former, having swiftly adapted to the routine they had during the war. As evening fell, everyone gathered around the campfire and it became significantly colder. Adapting to such weather was much more challenging. When this long day was nearly complete, Varsi assisted the main protagonist in warming up using a hot beverage. The main protagonist decided to inventory the medications one evening, concerned about the well-being of all the warriors. Besides magical abilities, there should be remedies for healing and reserve. Unexpectedly, Turek approached her. He wanted to speak with Renee, but immediately noticed the fatigued expression on the main protagonist's face. He instantly understood that insomnia troubled her greatly, disturbing the night. As it turned out, Cavert had handed something over to the young woman. She worried it might be a weapon or poison intended to harm the priestess. However, the vice-commander of the squad gave Renee a small vial containing tablets that aided peaceful sleep. The vice-commander asked the young woman to exercise caution as the tablets induced dependence. He did not wish her to walk with a malevolent expression. Furthermore, Turek delighted the main protagonists with the prospect that they would soon reach the enemy country's border. Subsequently, they would assault the capital, bringing the war to its conclusion. Recently, battles were not challenging because the knights had no opportunity to rest and problems with provisions arose. Unlike the imperial forces, who had more than enough, rain was expected soon, and Cavert would once again suffer without the chance to rest. The healer planned to visit him and assist with this, also expressing gratitude for the medicine. She felt somewhat relieved at the thought that everything would end very soon, that her dream of returning home would come true, and no one would be in danger anymore. Renee gazed at the sky, filled with hope for the better, when suddenly numerous flaming arrows appeared in the clouds, flying directly from the direction of their camp. Amidst the cohort, a commotion arose as the canvas shelters where the majority sought refuge ignited, and everyone endeavored to vacate swiftly. One of the arrows soared directly toward the young lady, only thanks to Turek pushing her aside. Nothing dire occurred. As the group neared the enemy's final line of defense, the absence of strong resistance seemed peculiar. It now became clear that they had been lured into a trap. The vice commander instructed the priestess to take cover behind him. However, near one of the blazing structures, she spotted her injured comrade. The building next to her was on the verge of collapsing. Thus, Renee shouted to her companion, urging her to flee as swiftly as possible. Yet she was simply relieved that the main heroine was unharmed. The knight forbade the young woman from rushing to aid Lily, as fire was rampant everywhere. Orders were issued to escort all healers to a safe place. However, Renee tried to elude Turek, accompanying her to save those in need, yet the vice commander did not release the young lady's hand. Keeping her close, he wished for her to be as far away as possible from potential danger. Within moments, the possibility of leaving became irrelevant. An arrow grazed the main protagonist's cheek, and foes emerged from the bushes, revealing their surroundings as an encirclement. As it turned out, other healers in proximity to the main protagonist were similarly injured, which was quite perplexing, as adversaries typically refrain from attacking such individuals. Turek intended to divert the foes, while Renee fled to a secure location. However, he likely had not yet realized that the enemy soldiers had precisely the same she could not. Therefore, the main heroine decided not to disclose this. To avoid compounding issues for others, the priestess opted to silently comply with instructions and swiftly ran away. Meanwhile, the knight engaged the assailants in combat. However, one of the enemy soldiers released an arrow not aimed at the man confronting them, but directly at the retreating main heroine. The young lady failed to evade, as she did not perceive the danger in time, resulting in her being wounded and unable to move forward. Furthermore, another adversary emerged from the bushes. However, fleeing farther was impossible for the young woman. Turek came to her aid, deeply concerned about the potential calamity that could befall the young lady. There was no time for delay. Spotting the adversaries, the vice commander shielded the vulnerable young woman with his body, evidently prepared to endure a substantial blow. The healer realized that had she forewarned the man earlier, merely expressing her assumption regarding the attacker's intent, this may not have transpired. Glancing at Turek's back, she witnessed a plethora of arrows embedded in him. This occurred because in the stressful situation, she could not deliberate and comprehend what she should do. The young lady felt guilt. After all, she could have forewarned the man about the enemy's intentions. Unusual energy, reminiscent of electricity, emanated around them, annihilating adversaries. It was Cavert who came to assist his allies and was profoundly indignant at the unexpected assault on their camp. The enemy warriors were vanquished, but Turek collapsed, utterly drained. He could not move. An arrow still protruded from his back. The surviving members of the enemy squad were greatly frightened by the appearance of the blood harvester on the battlefield, prompting them to flee. Renee decided to attend to the injured. At that moment, however, the first task was to move him to shelter, a task not easily accomplished as the camp was engulfed in flames. Although the knight reassured the young lady that he was fine, it was evident that this was far from the truth. The healer attempted to calm herself, convincing herself that she could do it. After all, she was summoned to war precisely because her abilities exceeded those of others. She initiated the healing process, intending to do her utmost. All that was needed was to concentrate, thought the main heroine. However, her power abruptly ceased to function. She had barely commenced the healing, and by that moment she had not even managed to address half of the vice commander's wounds. Renesha attempted to call for help. However, chaos reigned in the camp. Everyone was occupied with various, no less significant matters. Approaching her from behind, Kavard embraced her and endeavored to console her. The blame for what had occurred lay with the commander who had chosen the campsite. Without anticipating an attack upon the words of the blood harvester, the healer felt somewhat better, and for a brief moment her divine power returned. Regrettably, it did not endure for long, as it turned out. In this fateful moment she simply could not cope. Although immense hope and expectations had been placed upon her earlier, the young lady was not inclined to surrender so easily. Renee recalled all moments associated with the dying vice commander, moments that were kind and humorous. In that moment, something within her broke anew. She wept, and her divine power became more potent than ever before. Renee's astonishment lay in her disinterest, in her own condition and the reasons for her 2-day slumber. Her concern revolved around the well-being of the individuals she had endeavored to heal. Fortunately, the man was well ensconced in his tent. This news brought immense relief to the young ladies. Hence, she thanked the deity, even though she could not recall how she had healed him. Nevertheless, she was delighted to learn that her entreaties had indeed been heard. Lily recounted to her friend the miracle that transpired on the day of the battle. Despite the rainy weather, clouds suddenly dispersed, and spring flowers blossomed amid winter. Furthermore, the injuries of everyone in proximity, both enemies and allies of the Empire, were instantaneously healed. This shocked Renesha. She feared she could not save one person, yet she ended up healing all the wounded simultaneously. Of course, after this, the young lady lost consciousness for a full 2 days, and the blood harvester himself brought her from the battlefield. Currently, Lily had to leave her friend to report on her condition, while she herself needed a bit of rest. However, without waiting for her friend's return, Renee escaped from the tent to personally check the condition of the vice commander of the Nickel Knights. The young lady managed to move aside a bit when Lily found her. Worried that her friend had left the tent without permission, Elvinores, who happened to be nearby, suggested Renee take a stroll. Despite her lingering weakness, a short walk in the fresh air would undoubtedly be beneficial. The man agreed that a miracle occurred on the day of the enemy's attack, one that could only be described as a divine blessing. Many warriors began referring to the healer as a saint, echoing the commander of the paladins, who regarded her as the envoy of the Lord. However, she herself did not believe that she had done something extraordinary until the end. She had been guided by selfish motives, ensuring she would not consider herself guilty of another's death. Surprisingly, Elvinores was not disappointed by this truth expressed by the main heroine. The paladin commander himself asserted confidently that in any case, he would not be disappointed in the main heroine. Furthermore, he resolved to express his support through embraces, but prior to that, of course, he inquired whether she objected to such actions. This somewhat disconcerted Renesha, yet she concluded that there was nothing amiss in such a pleasant gesture from a handsome gentleman. He was quite pleased with her decision, and as a result, drew the novitiate closer. Embracing her firmly, the paladin commander was utterly convinced that even if the maiden exhibited some selfishness in her actions, he nonetheless remained altruistic and sacrificial for the sake of others. This conversation aided the young lady in regaining some composure, and if not entirely, she partially released her sense of guilt. Following this stroll, she managed to rendezvous with Turek, who was delighted to see his savior. She had undoubtedly healed him better than all others. He even wished to showcase his completely intact torso after all that had transpired. However, the blood harvester restrained him, as it would be beyond propriety. The vice commander promptly withdrew, avoiding the wrath of his superior, thereby leaving Renee alone with him. The man noted that the main heroine's hair had become shorter. It did not trouble him greatly, but he worried that the healer might find it disheartening. The priestess seized this encounter as an opportunity to express gratitude to the man for once again aiding her on the battlefield. Even though everyone around hailed her as the true heroine, Kavar persisted even now when everything was behind them. In persuading Renee that he was to blame for what transpired that day, she need not harbor guilt for acting selfishly. Following this, Turek returned and once again showered his savior with kind words. The summit became visible shortly, marking the beginning of the enemy's territory. However, no enemy soldiers were spotted anywhere. Even after a meticulous reconnaissance of the area, the healer was quite content with this, as everyone, including herself, was now in complete safety. Unexpectedly, Kavar rushed towards Renesha, immediately unfolding the priestess in his arms, greatly startling her. However, in reality, there was a reason for this. A whole squadron of enemy knights was positioned directly on the mountain. Initially, everyone prepared for battle. Turek even unsheathed his massive sword. When it suddenly became apparent that all these people were entirely unarmed, they handed a scroll to the commander, detailing the capitulation of the kingdom and its agreement to join the empire. This decision was influenced by the immense power of the main heroine, leaving them in awe. Joy erupted among all. Thus concluded this so-called safe war. Former foes even organized a banquet for the victors. The entire group was supposed to return to the Empire's capital the very next day, using scrolls designed for transportation. Unfortunately, due to a fire, none remained. Naturally, this disappointed the main heroine, as they now faced a rather lengthy journey, given that the enemies surrendered too late. Unfortunately, the girl sprained her ankle on the way and was next to the Paladin commander, unable to secretly heal herself. As soon as they reached the Elvanura's camp, he decided to assist the disciple who had injured her leg on the journey. Though she was terribly embarrassed, the man decided to reveal his secret to Renee. He healed her legs with his divine power, which, as it turned out, he possessed as well. When combined with the abilities of a knight, he surpassed anyone else. The temple servant did not understand why he chose to confide his secret specifically in her, but he did not provide a clear answer, only inquiring about her own conjectures on the matter. Following this discourse, the main heroine proceeded to the river to cleanse herself. She suddenly realized that recollections of every word uttered by the knight commander quickened her heart. Perhaps she had fallen in love with him. This realization was abrupt. Lily found the maiden by the water. She was somewhat vexed, as the weather outside was bitterly cold, and Renee had yet to return to their tent. Naturally, she divulged everything to her friend. Lily herself had observed peculiarities in the interaction between Renee and Alvanuras, but she never thought it would escalate to this extent, although it was evident that the man was far more solicitous towards the main heroine than the others. Unlike the enamored Renesha, her friend endeavored to rationally assess the situation. However, this was quite challenging, as the main heroine was unwilling to hear any arguments. The next morning, Renee resolved to confess her feelings to the object of her affection before they returned to the capital, and it became too late for such action. She wished to finally cease tormenting herself with thoughts on this matter, as doing so might once again rob her of the opportunity to sleep. As the group set forth, Renee continued to vex her friend by incessantly discussing the same topic, fretting over the impending confession to her beloved. Unexpectedly, the Paladin commander himself approached them, which was quite astonishing. He informed them of the imminent arrival at the next stop and the forthcoming dinner there. Upon reaching the lodging place, the main heroine was resolute in making her confession right that evening. Lily wished to alleviate her friend's distress, and therefore contemplated summoning the gentleman to her side. However, this was decidedly an ill-conceived notion, and the main heroine declined such assistance for a while. Approaching the Paladin commander was simply not feasible, as he was invariably surrounded by a throng of people. However, later he ventured out onto the street. At that moment, the maiden deemed it her opportunity to prevent herself from being daunted. She poured a full glass of wine from the bottle on the table and imbibed it in one gulp. A single glass was sufficient to induce significant inebriation. Renesha could scarcely discern her path. Everything before her eyes blurred. Nevertheless, she managed to reach the forest and locate the man to whom she believed she wished to confess her feelings. Unfortunately, the main protagonist could not bring herself to call him by name, as she was already excessively agitated. The maiden candidly spoke of her affection for one of the Empire's heroes, citing several reasons why she had fallen for him, such as his bright smile, care, and attentiveness toward her. Of course, the healer did not anticipate that her sentiments would be reciprocated and had resigned herself to the possibility of rejection. However, the man before her did not reject her. Instead, he drew her into an embrace. At that moment, Renee realized that the appearance of the man before her differed significantly from that of the Paladin commander. She had mistakenly confessed her love to the bloodthirsty slayer. The next morning, the maiden awoke with a dreadful hangover. The events that transpired earlier seemed like a very strange dream to her, and the temple servant decided to inspect the place connected with her memories of the mistaken confession. The location was exactly as she had envisioned it in her thoughts. Moreover, Cavert was nearby, heading directly toward the main heroine. Renesha wished to avoid him, so she concealed herself behind a tree. However, this offered little help. The man still approached her directly and inquired about her recollections of the evening. She, of course, remembered everything perfectly. She attributed her desire to hide to mere embarrassment, which elicited a smile from the bloodthirsty slayer, who then requested the main heroine to address him by name informally. So such events further shocked Renee. It was not often she witnessed this individual with a joyful countenance.